The NHL trade line has come and gone, and we are in the end game of the NHL regular season. Time to take a look at which teams had the best weeks, the worst weeks, and which ones are in pole position to make the playoffs and a deep run after the first week of March. And we start, as always, in the bottom tier with the three worst teams in the NHL, the Sharks, Blackhawks, and the Predators. Give some credit to the Predators, who have had just an abysmal season. They actually had a pretty good week. 3 wins last week, 2 of them pretty decisive, and yeah, that's not the most brutal of schedules going against Boston, Seattle, and Chicago. But you know what? We've been kicking the Predators enough while they're down. Let's shout them out when they do something good for once in their damn lives. One tier above them, above the worst of the worst, is the garbage tier, which includes the Penguins, Sabres, Kraken, Flyers, and Ducks. And for the Flyers, a sign of another wasted year as they go 0-4 last week. Not a very easy schedule, I will give them that. Calgary, Winnipeg, and New Jersey, but come on, you have got to beat Seattle, and none of those games were they within 2 goals in their defeats. So the Flyers' season is basically over, especially after they sold off at the deadline last week. Up one tier, we have 2 teams that I am calling the old yellers of the NHL. These are teams that are bad, that decided to sell at the deadline correctly, and that are just generally old, don't have a great future ahead of them, are going to have to go into a rebuild very intensely, those being the Islanders and the Bruins. Both teams traded away key pieces of their franchises, the Islanders and Brock Nelson, and the Bruins and Marchand, obviously. Going to be a very painful last month of the season, but both of these teams are ultimately going in the right direction. Next, we move on to the fringe playoff teams, which includes the Red Wings, Utah Hockey Club, Canucks, Canadiens, Blues, and Rangers. All of these teams have an outside shot of making the playoffs. I don't think many of them will, but quoting Lloyd Christmas,
"So you're telling me there's a chance?"
But 2 of these teams did not help themselves last week, and that includes the Detroit Red Wings, who had the worst week of anybody in the NHL, losing all 4 games in regulation, including 2 games that, in my opinion, they really had to win. Utah is a bad team that they needed to beat, and Ottawa is right with them in the hunt for that final wildcard spot. They lost to them. Losing to Carolina and Washington, more understandable, but Detroit getting 0 points out of those 4 games is pretty brutal coming down the stretch. And then the other team that had a really bad week last week, not as bad because they did manage to pick up a few points, is the New York Rangers. Overtime losses to Washington and Ottawa are very tough to swallow, especially because in Ottawa they blew a lead against a team that again is going to be competing against them for the wild card. But then against Columbus, a game that had a lot of playoff implications, the Rangers could have easily put the Jackets on the ropes had they won that game, and instead they get absolutely dummied 7-3. It's just a rough time in New York for the Rangers as their path to the playoffs just got a little bit harder last weekend. Another tier up, and we have the 2 Chaos Goblin teams. The Columbus Blue Jackets and Calgary Flames are both teams that I still don't understand how they are playing so well all year, but at this point, embrace the chaos. They're both really good, fun, young teams, and they're both appointment TV for me to watch. Fantilli just got a hat trick for the Jackets. For Calgary, Dustin Wolf continues to be absolutely lights out in net. 2 teams with very bright futures that I think are going to be very fun to watch down the stretch, and I hope both of them make it in. One tier up, we have 4 teams that I think are solidly in the playoffs: the Kings, Devils, Wild, and the Ottawa Senators. Some of these teams are in wildcard positions like the Sens, but just in my personal opinion, I think all 4 of these teams are good enough to be in the playoffs, and I would expect them to make it when the season is all said and done. Up next in the tier above them are the Cup contenders. This is a big tier that has a lot of teams that I think have a realistic shot to win the Stanley Cup, including the Vegas Golden Knights, Toronto Maple Leafs, Carolina Hurricanes, Edmonton Oilers, Colorado Avalanche, Tampa Bay Lightning, and Washington Capitals. And it's really fun for me to say that there are 7 teams that you could credibly make an argument have a chance to win the Stanley Cup heading into the playoffs, and 2 of them had really good weeks. Carolina, of course, had the best week of anybody in the NHL. Even though I didn't love their trade deadline by shipping off Mikko Rantanen after they paid so much to get him, they got back a good return. Logan Stankoven is already showing to be a very good player for Carolina. And you know what? They got 3 wins last week, including beating the Winnipeg Jets. Very impressive for Carolina. They're going to be a threat in the playoffs. The other team that had a great week is the Colorado Avalanche. Obviously at the deadline, very active, getting Brock Nelson, Ryan Lindgren, Charlie Coyle. But on the ice, they were just dominant last week. All of their games were at least 3-goal wins, including an impressive showing against the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know the other games that they played, Pittsburgh, San Jose, and Chicago, not tough opponents, but they did win those games, and they won them handily, which is what you want to see. And that leaves us with the 3 teams who I consider to be elite, the best of the best teams: the Winnipeg Jets, Florida Panthers, and Dallas Stars, all teams that made pretty significant additions at the deadline. Winnipeg's was the least impressive in my opinion, getting Tanev and Luke Schenn just for some depth. Florida, obviously a huge addition in Brad Marchand, and also getting Seth Jones from Chicago before the deadline, and then Mikko Rantanen going to the Dallas Stars, maybe the biggest deal of the entire deadline. The Stars are now set up to be, in my opinion, one of the favorites, if not the favorite right now, to win the Stanley Cup.